To most viewers watching that lighthearted clip of Ronaldo shaking hands with President Donald Trump, it looked almost playful. Two global icons trading polite smiles, surrounded by polished marble, flashing cameras, and an atmosphere crafted for public consumption. But behind the scenes, behind the practiced body language and diplomatic phrasing, there existed a darker, more complex reason for Ronaldo's appearance. A reason that Trump and his inner circle were eager to downplay, even bury, beneath a mountain of cheerful small talk and carefully staged photo opportunities. What the casual eye didn't catch was the timing of this gathering. On that Wednesday, after a politically charged diplomatic meeting between Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the presence of Ronaldo was no coincidence. The prince, known globally as MBS, had poured millions into Ronaldo, personally bringing him to Saudi Arabia under the banner of Al Nasser in 2023. A deal worth a staggering $200 million per year, renewed and extended into the future. Ronaldo was no longer just an athlete. He was a symbol, an asset of soft power, and in some ways, a bridge between worlds that rarely trusted one another. And yet, Ronaldo's presence at the White House did something the diplomats could not. It softened the optics. It painted the meeting between Trump and MBS with a brush of normalcy, glamour, and global familiarity. The prince, shadowed by years of controversy, especially the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, needed that image. He needed relief from the storm of criticism that had followed him into the U.S., his first visit since 2018, the year when the world learned of Khashoggi's horrifying fate. For many Americans, his arrival in Washington was unacceptable, and as Trump welcomed him with open arms, declaring that things happen, the tension in the room became almost invisible to those watching through edited news clips. But for those inside the Oval Office, the discomfort was unmistakable. A question from an ABC journalist threatened to drag the conversation back to Khashoggi's murder. Trump quickly shut it down, scolding the reporter, telling them not to embarrass our guest, and insisting that the prince knew nothing. Despite the CIA's official assessment stating the opposite, it was in this environment that Ronaldo's arrival struck like a strategic distraction. Cameras shifted, headlines softened. Social media exploded with excitement over Ronaldo's first steps in America in nearly a decade. The political shadows temporarily shrank behind the blinding glow of football's biggest star. But the question remained, why was Ronaldo really there? Why had he suddenly returned to the US after so many years of avoiding it? To understand this moment, one must go back to 2009, to a Las Vegas hotel room, and to an allegation that chased him across continents for more than a decade. Catherine Mayorga's accusation of rape, something Ronaldo has always fiercely denied, had left a permanent stain on his ability to set foot in American territory. With the lawsuit active, stepping into the U.S. meant risking detainment, questioning, or legal entanglement. Even as Real Madrid, Juventus, and Portugal traveled to American stadiums, Ronaldo stayed away. Quietly, consistently, purposefully. For him, America became a locked door. But in 2023, everything changed. After years of legal battles, the judge dismissed the lawsuit completely, declaring in a 42-page ruling that Mayorga had lost her opportunity to pursue the case. Her lawyer was ordered to pay Ronaldo over $330,000 in compensation. His record was restored, both in the eyes of the law and in the court of global opinion. For the first time in nearly a decade, Cristiano could travel freely to the United States without fear. Still, his sudden appearance at the White House wasn't just about freedom. It wasn't just about showing face. According to insiders, Ronaldo wanted more, something only Trump could give, or at least influence. Behind closed doors, discussions were reportedly centered on three sensitive points: reputation, security, and future opportunities in the U.S., particularly ahead of the upcoming World Cup. Cristiano's camp understood that returning to American soil was not simply a legal matter. It was a matter of public acceptance. And a handshake with the former president, amplified across every corner of the internet, was a subtle but powerful message. Ronaldo was welcome again. Trump himself had his own reasons. His meeting with MBS had turned into a minefield of uncomfortable questions. The presence of Ronaldo, a global superstar with a staggering fan base, acted like a shield, redirecting the narrative away from political controversy and towards sports, friendship, and diplomacy. Even the critics shifted focus, if only for a moment, as the event continued. Ronaldo met dignitaries, exchanged polite phrases, smiled for cameras, and played the role perfectly. Yet beneath every gesture, there was an air of calculation. He was rebuilding something, reclaiming something, warming up the American public before his expected arrival in March for World Cup-related commitments. It was not desperation. It was strategy, sharp, quiet, and impeccably timed. For Trump, it was a win. For MBS, it was a shield. But for Ronaldo, it was more personal. This visit marked the end of a long exile, the closing of a chapter he never wanted to be part of, and the start of a carefully planned return to a country that once adored him, questioned him, doubted him, and now seemed ready to welcome him back as Ronaldo left the White House. Reporters shouted questions, but he simply smiled. He knew that the world had seen exactly what he wanted them to see. The cameras caught the handshake, the laughter, the symbolism. But the real motives, the silent negotiations, the strategic timing, the delicate dance between politics and personal redemption, remained hidden, known only to the men behind those closed doors. And perhaps that was exactly the point. The motorcade pulled away from the White House, its tinted windows shielding the world's most famous footballer from the swarm of reporters racing along the barriers, shouting questions that faded into the cold Washington air. Inside the vehicle, Ronaldo leaned back, the faint glow of the city reflecting off the interior. For a brief moment, away from the cameras and the flashing lights, his expression shifted. Less polished, less guarded, and undeniably contemplative. He knew better than anyone that returning to the United States wasn't just a homecoming. It was a test. The world had watched every step he took since he first arrived in Saudi Arabia, since he became the face of a new era for their football project. That meant everything he did now carried weight, consequence, and the lingering echo of a controversy that had followed him for years. Even with the case dismissed, even with his name cleared, the memory of the accusation lingered among some. And he understood that America, more than any nation, was a place where public perception could shift like sand in the wind as the car drove past the monuments. Symbols of power, history, and conflict. Ronaldo silently traced every move he had made since the meeting. The handshake with Trump, the carefully timed smiles, the subtle nods towards the cameras. Every gesture had been deliberate, part of a larger mosaic he'd been building ever since the ruling that freed him from legal uncertainty. His team had advised him that reclaiming the American audience was essential, not merely for football, but for the global brand he had spent 2 decades creating. The U.S. market was powerful, emotional, and influential. Winning it back meant more than a symbolic gesture. It meant future deals, future sponsorships, future opportunities. And perhaps, though he would never admit it openly, it meant a return to a part of the world he once loved. The bright lights of Los Angeles, the glamour of Miami, the business circles of New York. A world that had been closed to him for too long. But there was another layer to it, far more complex, far more delicate. Ronaldo's presence had served as a golden shield not just for his own ambitions, but for the meeting between Trump and MBS. The prince's return to Washington had stirred ghosts the American government never fully laid to rest. Jamal Khashoggi's name still hung heavy in political discussions. The brutality of the assassination, the international outcry, the CIA's assessment. It all resurfaced the moment the prince stepped onto U.S. soil. The White House desperately needed a distraction, something so iconic, so globally irresistible, that it could overshadow the uncomfortable questions that reporters and the American public would inevitably raise. Ronaldo had delivered that distraction perfectly. The footage of MBS and Trump shaking hands had been met with predictable criticism. But when Ronaldo walked into frame, the public conversation bent in a new direction. Suddenly, the trending topics shifted from geopolitics and human rights to Ronaldo meets Trump, Ronaldo returns to the U.S., and CR7 White House visit. In a matter of hours, global focus pivoted. The prince's controversial presence became a footnote in the larger narrative of Ronaldo's unexpected return. Yet the arrangement hadn't been one-sided. The prince had made Ronaldo the crown jewel of Saudi Arabia's sports revolution. He had paid him like no club in Europe ever would. He had built an empire of modern stadiums, international partnerships, and diplomatic influence, and Ronaldo, whether he wished to or not, had become part of that machinery. In return, MBS needed favors. Not many, not always, but moments like this, where a single appearance could shift global attention, were invaluable. The motorcade slowed as it approached the hotel where Ronaldo would stay the night. He glanced at his phone, notifications still pouring in, fans celebrating his return, media outlets dissecting the handshake, pundits speculating on the strategic timing of his visit. It was exactly the outcome his advisors predicted. But Ronaldo knew there was still more to navigate. He stepped out of the car, escorted by security, and felt that familiar rush of cold American air hit his face. Carried memories, both good and haunting. Nights in Los Angeles clubs, endorsement shoots in New York, summer training camps interrupted by news of legal motions filed, statements released, reporters digging. Each memory stacked behind the other like pages from a novel he thought he would never read again. Now he was back in the final chapter of that story, rewriting what had once been out of his control. As he entered the building, a young hotel staff member froze upon seeing him. Her eyes widened. Ronaldo smiled subtly, a silent acknowledgement that despite everything, some reactions remained universal. The admiration, the awe, the recognition. It all followed him, no matter the continent. Later that night, in the quiet of his room high above the city, he stood by the window overlooking Washington's glowing streets. Far below, tourists snapped photos of monuments they would later post online with captions about how history shaped nations. And in a way, Ronaldo understood that he, too, was shaping something. A narrative, a return, a delicate balance between reputation, diplomacy, and personal freedom. He picked up the briefing folder his team had left on the table. Inside were outlines of upcoming commitments. Media appearances, charitable events, preliminary meetings for World Cup promotions, and a discreet set of notes regarding the broader impact of his White House visit. He flipped through each page slowly, absorbing the implications. But the last page stopped him. It wasn't about business or football or diplomacy. It was about perception, how the world had received his re-entry to America, how the headlines compared to those from the past, how the tone had shifted from skepticism to excitement. For the first time in a long time, Ronaldo felt that the weight he'd carried for years was starting to loosen. Not disappear, not fully, but loosen enough for him to breathe. He closed the folder, exhaled deeply, and looked out over the city again. The White House meeting had been a beginning, not an end, and this return, this carefully constructed, strategically timed return, was only the first step in a much bigger story. The night deepened outside the window, the city slowly giving way to silence, but Ronaldo remained awake, watching the distant lights flicker like scattered stars across the capital. Every moment he stood there felt symbolic. His return, his presence, the unspoken negotiations hidden beneath diplomacy and smiles. For years, America had been a chapter sealed shut, a place tangled in legal uncertainty and public doubt. But now, at last, he was rewriting that chapter with intention, precision, and undeniable purpose. Far from the cameras, far from the echo of reporters shouting questions, he allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. He understood that this visit wasn't simply about a handshake with a president, nor a photo beside a controversial crown prince. It was about reclaiming something he lost, his freedom to step onto U.S. soil, his ability to move without fear, his right to shape his own narrative again. The world had watched him climb, fall, rise, and transform, but this was a different kind of victory. One fought not on the pitch, but in courts, headlines, and the hidden corridors of influence. Now the path ahead was clear. His next visit in March would mark a new beginning, one where he would return not as a man under suspicion, not as a symbol of controversy, but as Cristiano Ronaldo, the global icon who had survived one of the most complex battles of his career. And as he finally stepped back from the window, switching off the lights and letting the hotel room fade into darkness, he carried with him the quiet assurance that this journey, with all its shadows and political undertones, had only strengthened his resolve for what came next. His story wasn't just continuing, it was evolving, and the world, whether ready or not, would be watching every step, because Ronaldo had returned. And nothing would ever be the same again. And as this chapter closes, another begins, a story still unfolding, still shifting, still writing itself across continents and power circles. For now, one thing is certain. The world will follow, the world will question, and the world will witness the next great moment in the saga of Cristiano Ronaldo. If you want to stay updated with stories like this, stories that dive deeper, reveal the truth behind the headlines, and uncover the real power moves shaping the world of sports, don't forget to subscribe. Subscribe now to WSN World Sports News, where every headline is just the beginning.